Something was wrong with my dock that morning. Two men in HOA vests were already standing on it, measuring tape stretched across the planks, and one of them told me the board had ordered an inspection effective immediately. They said the dock now fell under new community shoreline rules, and if I interfered, fines would begin that same day. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I asked who authorized the inspection and whether they had written notice. One of them pointed toward the water and said the HOA president had full authority over all shoreline structures. The other began photographing my dock from multiple angles, stepping deliberately close to the edge where the water met the posts. I took out my phone and started recording. Not their faces, the tape measure, the clipboard, the way their boots stood entirely on boards that, according to my deed, were inside my property line. This dock had been here when I bought the house. It was not shared. No one accessed it except me. There was no HOA path, no community gate, no easement. The shoreline curved around my lot in a way that made the dock look communal if you only glanced at it from the water, and I suspected that was the excuse they were using. The men finished in silence. Before leaving, one handed me a printed notice. It stated that the dock failed to meet updated HOA safety and appearance standards. The notice listed deadlines for repainting, railing height changes, and a requirement that community access signage be installed. At the bottom was a warning about escalating penalties. I read it twice. Then I thanked them and went back inside. That afternoon, I reviewed my closing documents. The survey was clear. The dock sat fully within my deeded boundary, measured from the shoreline markers approved by the county. The HOA plat map included the shoreline as a general boundary, but did not assign docks as shared assets. That distinction mattered. I did not email anyone yet. I waited. 3 days later, the HOA president arrived herself. She stood at the end of the dock with crossed arms and informed me that the inspection had revealed violations. She spoke calmly but firmly, as if the matter were settled. I asked her to clarify which section of the bylaws gave the HOA jurisdiction over my dock. She said the shoreline belonged to the community and anything touching it was subject to inspection. I asked for that in writing. She hesitated, then said the written notice already covered it. I told her I would need a specific citation. She said she would follow up. Before leaving, she reminded me that failure to comply would result in daily fines. I recorded the entire exchange, keeping my phone angled at the dock and the waterline. The next notice arrived by email that evening. This one used different language. It stated that the dock was adjacent to community property and therefore subject to oversight for safety purposes. It did not cite a bylaw. It attached a different deadline and a revised fine schedule. I saved it. Over the next 2 weeks, inspections continued. Different volunteers, different clipboards. Each time, the explanation shifted slightly. Sometimes it was about safety, sometimes aesthetics. Once, someone claimed the dock interfered with potential future access. I never blocked them. I never argued. I recorded dates, times, and exact statements. I photographed where they stood. I noted that no one ever approached from land, only from the water, as if trying to imply shared use without proving it. I requested written clarification twice more. The responses contradicted each other. One email claimed the dock was partially on HOA-controlled shoreline. Another said jurisdiction was based on proximity, not ownership. That inconsistency mattered. I ordered a certified shoreline survey from the county records office. It matched my original documents exactly. The dock posts fell entirely within my parcel. The shoreline markers were unchanged. There was no recorded easement, current or historical. With that in hand, I filed a formal inquiry with the county's land use department. I attached my deed, the survey, the inspection notices, and a log of every HOA visit. I did not accuse anyone of misconduct. I asked a simple question. Did the HOA have authority to regulate a privately deeded dock with no shared access? The county scheduled a hearing. The HOA continued issuing notices until the week before it. Then, abruptly, the emails stopped. No explanation, no withdrawal, just silence. At the hearing, the HOA representative presented a community map that shaded the entire shoreline as common area. When asked about the dock, she said it was functionally communal. When asked for documentation supporting that claim, she referenced internal guidelines. The county officer compared those guidelines to the recorded survey. He compared the inspection logs to the plat map. He asked why the HOA descriptions changed over time. There was no immediate ruling. The officer said he would review the evidence. 2 weeks later, the decision arrived in writing. The dock was confirmed as private property. The HOA was instructed to remove it from all community inspection schedules and documents. Any fines issued were declared unenforceable. The HOA was warned against future enforcement attempts outside its jurisdiction. No apology came. None was required. The dock remains exactly where it has always been: quiet, private, unchanged. And the HOA has not stepped on it since. The first certified letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, folded stiffly inside a windowed envelope. It referenced the earlier inspection, but added new language. This time, the dock was described as a shoreline-adjacent structure with potential community impact. The phrasing was careful, as if someone had edited it repeatedly to avoid a direct claim of ownership. It included a compliance deadline that did not match the earlier notice. I added it to the folder. 2 days later, another inspection took place. This one happened early, just after sunrise. I was making coffee when I saw movement through the window. The same measuring tape, a different clipboard, a different explanation. This inspector said the HOA had received concerns about safety rails. I asked who raised them. He said it was not listed. I asked whether the dock was considered private or community property. He said he had been told not to answer that directly. I recorded the exchange. Not the man, the questions, the answers. By the end of the week, the pattern was clear. Each inspection added something new. Not a correction, not a clarification, an expansion. One notice mentioned repainting. Another referenced spacing between boards. A third suggested that future community access required uniform standards. None of them cited the same rule twice. None of them acknowledged my written requests for clarification. When I followed up by email, the replies arrived from different addresses. One came from the HOA president, another from a compliance officer, a third from a generic account that signed off as HOA administration. Each response answered a different question than the one I asked. I stopped asking. Instead, I started logging. Every inspection went into a spreadsheet. Date, time, names if given, exact words used. I noted where each person stood, whether their feet touched the dock or the shoreline, whether they arrived by foot or by boat. I compared that against the HOA's own documents. The community map on their website shaded the shoreline as common area, but did not label any docks. The bylaws referenced shared facilities, but never defined them. The enforcement section allowed inspections of common property, not private structures. The gap between language and action grew wider. One afternoon, the HOA president returned. This time, she brought a laminated map. She laid it flat on the dock and pointed to a blue strip along the waterline. She said that strip represented community shoreline control. I asked her to show me where the dock crossed into it. She said it did not need to cross. Proximity was enough. I asked her to confirm that in writing. She said it was already clear. I asked why the written notices kept changing. She said enforcement was evolving. That word stood out.
I thanked her for her time. I did not agree or disagree. I asked her to email me the map she was referencing. She said she would. She never did. Instead, a new notice arrived the next week. This one included a fine schedule, daily amounts, retroactive language. It stated that non-compliance had already begun. The date listed was before the first inspection. I saved it. That same day, I requested public records from the county, shoreline jurisdiction maps, historical easements, any filings that referenced my parcel. I did not mention the HOA. I simply asked for records.
While waiting, I continued documenting. I installed a fixed camera inside my house that faced the dock through the window. It captured timestamps, nothing else. I did not post signs. I did not warn anyone. The camera was legal and visible from inside my own property. The HOA inspections continued. What changed was their behavior. Inspectors stopped stepping fully onto the dock. They measured from the edge. They took photos from the water. They spoke less. When I asked questions, they said they were just following direction. That direction, however, never appeared in writing. When the county records arrived, the answer was simple. The shoreline boundary was fixed. The dock sat entirely inside it. There were no pending changes, no shared designations, no conditional language. The evidence lined up cleanly. I assembled everything: notices, emails, logs, video timestamps, surveys, maps. I did not highlight emotions. I did not add commentary. I let the documents speak in sequence. Then I submitted a formal inquiry to the County Land Use Department. I asked whether an HOA could impose inspections, fines, or rules on a privately deeded dock with no shared access and no recorded easement. The county acknowledged receipt. The HOA did not. But 2 days later, a final inspection notice arrived. It stated that failure to comply before the end of the month would result in additional action. No definition, no signature. I added it to the folder and waited for the county to respond.
The county response did not come quickly. What did come quickly was pressure. The first sign was a letter slipped into my mailbox without postage. It was printed on HOA letterhead but unsigned. It referenced my continued non-compliance and warned that unresolved violations could affect community standing. The phrasing was vague enough to imply consequences without naming them. I photographed the envelope, then the letter, then I placed both in the folder. The next inspection did not involve measuring tools at all. 2 HOA representatives stood at the shoreline, not on the dock, and spoke to each other loudly enough for me to hear through the open window. They discussed liability, insurance, safety exposure. They did not address me directly. I recorded the audio from inside my house. Later that afternoon, I received an email stating that the HOA was temporarily suspending inspections pending clarification. It sounded like restraint. It was not. The same email asked me to voluntarily restrict use of the dock out of an abundance of caution. I did not reply. 3 days later, the HOA newsletter went out to the community. A short paragraph mentioned upcoming shoreline safety reviews and reminded residents that structures near common water areas may be subject to standards for the benefit of all. No docks were named, no addresses, but the implication was clear. Neighbors began asking questions, not accusations, curiosity. They had seen inspectors, they had heard rumors. I told them only that there was a jurisdiction question under review with the county, nothing more. The next notice arrived by certified mail. This one looked different. It referenced legal counsel. It stated that the HOA maintained its position regarding oversight authority. It did not cite a statute or bylaw. Instead, it attached an internal memo describing shoreline control as customary practice. Custom was not law. I added it to the evidence stack.
At this point, the inspections stopped completely. No visits, no measurements, no emails. The pressure shifted from physical presence to administrative weight. Letters, language, implied consequences. Then the county responded. The email was brief.
It stated that a hearing would be scheduled to review the inquiry. Both parties would be notified. Relevant documentation would be accepted in advance. I forwarded the notice to the HOA. Within an hour, I received a reply. It was polite, almost friendly. It suggested a meeting to resolve this internally before involving the county further. I declined, calmly, in writing. The HOA's tone changed after that. The next email accused me of refusing cooperation. It stated that the HOA had attempted resolution and that my lack of engagement left them no choice but to proceed. Proceed with what was not specified. 2 days before the hearing, a final packet arrived from the HOA. This one was thick. It included photos of the dock taken from the water, statements about potential safety risks, a copy of the same community map I had seen before, enlarged and highlighted. There was also a timeline. The timeline claimed the dock had always been treated as a community-adjacent structure. It listed inspections that had never occurred, dates that did not match my logs, names that did not appear on any notice I had received. That inconsistency mattered more than any argument. I did not respond. I prepared my own packet. Mine included nothing speculative, no opinions, no conclusions, just records. Original survey, county shoreline map, deed language, HOA notices in chronological order, inspection logs with timestamps, video stills showing inspectors standing fully on the dock, emails with shifting explanations. I numbered every page.
The hearing took place in a small county office, not a courtroom. A single hearing officer sat at the table. The HOA sent a representative and a consultant. I attended alone. The officer began by asking a simple question. What was the basis for HOA jurisdiction over the dock? The representative referenced community interest. The consultant referenced safety. Neither referenced a recorded document. When the officer asked whether there was an easement, the answer was no. When asked whether the dock crossed the boundary line, the answer was no. When asked why inspection notices used different definitions, there was no clear answer. The officer requested the HOA's internal memo. He compared it to the county map. He compared inspection dates to my logs. He asked why fines were dated before inspections occurred. There was no argument. No raised voices, just pauses. At the end of the session, the officer said he would issue a written determination. Outside the building, the HOA representative said nothing. Neither did I. The dock remained untouched that evening. The water was calm. Nothing had changed physically, but the direction of the story had. The determination did not arrive immediately. What arrived instead was a pause that felt deliberate. For the first time in weeks, there were no emails from the HOA, no letters, no inspections, no reminders. The silence was noticeable because it was new. I continued using the dock as I always had, quietly, normally. No signs, no changes. The camera remained in place, recording nothing but water and empty boards. 7 days after the hearing, the HOA sent one more message. This one was brief. It stated that enforcement actions were on hold pending county review. No acknowledgement of jurisdiction, no withdrawal of prior claims. I saved it. 2 days later, the county requested additional clarification from the HOA. I was copied on the email. The request was specific. It asked the HOA to identify the exact recorded document granting authority over the dock or shoreline segment in question. The HOA responded with established community practice. The county replied once more. Practice, it stated, did not override recorded property rights. That exchange became part of the record. While waiting for the final decision, I reviewed the HOA's public documents again. Their website still displayed the same shoreline map. The dock was still unlabeled. The enforcement section still applied only to common areas. Nothing had changed. What had changed was their internal behavior. A revised newsletter went out to residents. The shoreline paragraph was gone. The safety language was softened. No mention of docks at all.
Neighbors stopped asking questions. 10 days after the hearing, the determination arrived by certified mail. It was thorough, page after page of findings. The officer laid out the facts in order: the deed, the survey, the shoreline boundary, the lack of easements, the inconsistent enforcement notices, the retroactive fines. Each point referenced a document. Each conclusion followed directly from the record. The ruling was clear. The dock was confirmed as private property. The HOA had no authority to inspect, regulate, or impose fines related to it. All prior notices were declared void. The HOA was instructed to remove the dock from any current or future community inspection schedules, maps, or enforcement plans. There was more. The officer noted that continued attempts to regulate the dock could constitute improper enforcement. He advised the HOA to review its procedures to avoid similar overreach. No penalties were assessed against me. None were needed. I forwarded the determination to the HOA. The response came the next day. It was short. It acknowledged receipt and stated that the HOA would comply with the county's guidance. No apology, no explanation, just compliance. A week later, the HOA website updated its map. The shoreline shading remained, but a note was added: private docks excluded. The inspection schedule removed any reference to shoreline structures not expressly designated as common. The fines ledger showed my account balance as 0.
The camera continued recording for another month. Nothing happened. No one stepped onto the dock, no one measured from the edge, no one photographed it from the water. The inspections did not resume under a different name or category. The authority figure who had insisted on jurisdiction never returned. At the next HOA meeting, according to a neighbor, enforcement procedures were briefly discussed. No names were mentioned, no incident described. The issue dissolved into policy quietly, the way it should have been handled from the beginning. I archived the folder. Digital copies remained backed up. Physical documents went into storage. The dock stayed exactly as it was. Same boards, same rails, same quiet mornings. There was no victory speech, no confrontation, no dramatic moment. Just a record that held, and a reminder that authority, when stretched beyond its limits, eventually collapses under its own documentation. The matter should have ended there. On paper, it had. But authority does not always retreat cleanly when it is corrected. Sometimes it tests the boundary one last time, quietly, to see whether anyone is still watching. About 3 weeks after the determination, I received a general HOA notice addressed to all residents. It announced a revision to shoreline guidelines and stated that the board would be reviewing prior enforcement actions for compliance. The language was neutral, administrative, but it signaled something important. They were cleaning up. I did not respond. I did not attend meetings. I did not engage neighbors in discussion. My role was finished. The record already existed. What followed unfolded without my involvement. A revised enforcement policy appeared on the HOA website. It clarified that private structures, even those adjacent to common areas, required documented jurisdiction before any inspection. It outlined a requirement for written citations referencing recorded authority. Those requirements had not existed before. Then came the resignations. First, the compliance officer stepped down. The announcement cited personal reasons. A week later, the HOA president announced she would not be seeking another term. There was no public explanation, only a brief statement thanking the community for its support. None of this was dramatic. No meeting erupted, no accusations surfaced publicly. The changes happened through posted notices and quiet transitions. The dock was never mentioned again. What did change was how the HOA interacted with residents. Notices became more specific. Inspections were announced in advance. Citations referenced exact bylaw sections. The language shifted from assumption to verification. That shift was not accidental. At one point, I received an email from the HOA's legal counsel. It thanked me for my cooperation during the county review and confirmed that all records related to my property had been closed. I acknowledged receipt, nothing more. The dock camera remained active through the end of the season. It captured nothing except weather. No inspectors, no visitors, no activity beyond my own. When winter arrived, I removed the camera and stored it with the rest of the documentation. Months later, a neighbor mentioned that the HOA had paid for a training session on enforcement limits and property boundaries. Attendance was mandatory for board members. The topic, according to the agenda, was avoiding jurisdictional overreach. I did not ask for details. The dock remained unchanged. No signage, no shared use, no access requests. The waterline looked the same as it always had. What struck me looking back was how little action it actually took to resolve the situation. There was no confrontation, no escalation in tone, no refusal to comply with lawful requests. The difference was documentation. Every step the HOA took was recorded, every shift in explanation preserved, every inconsistency allowed to stand on its own. By the time the issue reached someone with actual authority, the conclusion required no interpretation. The evidence arranged itself. That was the quiet power of restraint. The HOA authority figure had not been defeated by argument. She had been undone by process, by the expectation that claims should align with records, by the inability to reconcile internal assumptions with external law. No one was embarrassed publicly. No one was shouted down. The consequences came in policy revisions, leadership changes, and a permanent correction in how authority was applied. That was enough. The dock still sits where it always has, extending into the water at the same angle, resting fully within its boundary. Nothing about it advertises what happened. And that is the point. The strongest outcomes are often the least visible. They do not announce themselves. They do not linger. They simply correct the record and move on. All that remained was the final confirmation that the matter was closed for good. That arrived later, quietly, in the form of a county notice updating its files to reflect the resolved inquiry. No further action required. No follow-up scheduled. Case closed. The final notice did not come from the HOA. It came from the county. It arrived by mail, not email, printed on plain paper with an official header and a simple subject line. Closure of inquiry, shoreline jurisdiction review. The letter confirmed that the matter had been fully resolved. It stated that the county had updated its internal records to reflect the private status of the dock and the absence of any HOA authority over it. The inquiry was marked closed. No follow-up review was scheduled. No follow-up actions were required from me. The language was clinical, precise, final. A copy of that closure notice was sent to the HOA. Within a week, the HOA issued its own communication. This one was addressed to the entire community. It announced the adoption of revised enforcement procedures and acknowledged that a prior shoreline enforcement interpretation had been incorrect. It did not reference my property, the dock, or the inquiry itself. It framed the change as an administrative correction. But one paragraph stood out. It stated that enforcement actions taken without documented authority could expose the association to liability, and that future violations of procedure would result in internal disciplinary review. That sentence did not exist in any prior HOA document. Shortly after, a special board meeting was announced. The agenda listed one item under executive session: Review of enforcement conduct. No details were made public. None were required. The outcome became apparent a few weeks later. The former HOA president was formally removed from her enforcement role and barred from serving on compliance committees. The announcement cited failure to follow jurisdictional verification procedures. It did not accuse her of misconduct. It did not mention my case. It described the action as corrective, not punitive.
The compliance structure was reorganized. Inspections now required written authorization tied to recorded documents. Any disputed jurisdiction had to be referred externally before notices could be issued. Retroactive fines were explicitly prohibited. All of this happened without my involvement. I did not attend meetings. I did not submit comments. I did not speak to the board. The process moved forward on its own momentum, driven by the record that already existed. Several months later, during a routine county audit of shoreline properties, the dock was briefly reviewed again. This time, there were no inspectors with clipboards, no measurements, no warnings. The county file already contained everything it needed. The dock was noted as compliant and private. The review moved on. That was the last official interaction involving it. Looking back, the story never hinged on confrontation.
At no point did I need to prove intent or assign motive. The authority figure's mistake was not personal, it was structural. She assumed power where documentation did not support it. She treated proximity as ownership. She relied on repetition instead of verification. Each time the explanation shifted, the record grew stronger. By staying still, by remaining within the law, by allowing each action to stand exactly as it occurred, the imbalance corrected itself. The law did not side with me because I argued well. It sided with me because the evidence was consistent. The dock remains private. The shoreline remains unchanged. The HOA operates under clearer limits. The authority figure who misused her position no longer holds it. There was no dramatic ending, no announcement, no satisfaction to display, just closure. And that is how these situations are meant to end. Not with emotion, but with accuracy. Not with force, but with proof. Not with noise, but with a clean record that leaves no room for reinterpretation. The water still moves the same way it always has. The dock still stands exactly where it belongs, and the matter is finished.